Hi, everybody. This is Kris Fleming, the Genius Cultivator. I do lots of things with entrepreneurs and real estate investors, but one of my favorite things is getting to talk to folks in the investment real estate realm about their weirdest deals, their coolest deals, their most surprising deals, their scariest deals, so that you can help overcome your fear that the what ifs have happened and these folks didn't die. I want them to tell you about it. Today here I have my new friend Doug here with me, and he's got some interesting stories to tell us. Doug, will you tell us where you're from and how you got into investment real estate, a little bit about what you do now?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kris, for the opportunity, and looking forward to helping your audience, get another perspective, another person, another example where, things can go right and things can go wrong and how to get through all that. So looking forward to today's conversation. I'm originally from New Jersey, born and raised central New Jersey, in a little town called Branchburg. So Somerset County, if anyone's up that way or knows that area, about maybe an hour from New York City. And, met my wife up there and went to school in New Jersey. So New Jersey guy, not the Jersey Shore like you see on the TV shows and stuff like that necessarily. Some of that stuff is a little bit exaggerated, but definitely going to college there and going to hang out with my friends on the shore and also in Philly and stuff like that. There is some elements of truth to some of those things, but ultimately, like I said, born and raised in Jersey, went to school at Rider University up there as well. And now live in Florida, which I can share kind of how that all went down. But got into real estate. I basically got into real estate by accident. I worked for Johnson & Johnson right out of college, and in school I studied business and entrepreneurial studies and also some IT elements, so doing computer technology type work. And I'd been around that since as a kid. My dad was in the finance and IT consulting space for most of his career, and worked for Johnson & Johnson as well for like a good part of a few decades. Long story short, the youngest of 7 kids, and my sister went to Rider and she did basketball there. I was also an athlete, and then she worked at J&J for a little bit. Then she moved around different pharmaceutical companies. Jersey's got a lot of pharma companies, right? So if you don't know, it's a lot of headquarters of big institutional pharmaceutical type companies in New Jersey. Johnson & Johnson, they've got their headquarters in New Brunswick for corporate. And I worked in their Raritan office right out of college for their IT data center. And then I got into some corporate sourcing and procurement stuff as well back in 2007 to basically 2015. And that was when kind of 2014 when we got into real estate, but we kind of made a transition there. So that's a little bit about my background. Yeah.
All right. So you said you got into real estate on accident. What was the accident that caused that to occur?
So interesting. Yeah, no, wasn't really looking for like real estate or real estate investing. We had our own home, my wife and I. We were married a few years, I guess. We had our son who was probably 2.5, and my daughter was just born. And I was talking to a friend of mine about another business that he was in with like online marketing and stuff like that. He was sharing some stories, and he mentioned the acronym REI, and I didn't know what that really meant. I was like, REI, like I'm not familiar. And he's like, oh, come on, real estate investing. So I started researching, and I came into a funnel of sorts for another person that was offering education, and that guy ended up becoming my first mentor, who's out of Arizona, on the concept of the assignments of contract and how you can wholesale flip, things like that.
Okay.
So I fell into that process and got information. And then obviously you're exploring, you're like, this is interesting. I never knew you could do that. I watched a bunch of videos, learned a bunch, and ended up signing up for their mentorship program. And long story short, we're here 11 years later, lots of other things, hundreds of deals completed and stuff like that, just different stories and things to share. But it's been quite a journey for sure.
That is amazing. I know a lot of folks who will watch this video are only dreaming of hundreds of deals. So what is your focus now?
We have 3 distinct areas of focus in our business. There's the deal side, which there's residential deals that we pretty much predominantly focus on wholesale flips. And we do that in a couple different markets. So right now it's primarily focused in New Jersey and also Florida. And again, for folks that are listening, that's when you get a distressed seller, or you have a situation where there's motivation and you basically flip the contract to somebody else to take over your position on the deal. That's the way we started back in 2014. That's what we've done the most of. And you can make anywhere between 10K to our biggest deal is 140K on a wholesale flip. Those are cool. Those are exciting, right? Could be life changing. Basically, that's our one sort of focus area is the deal side, and residential is the main. But we're also looking into commercial as far as investing into commercial and getting into like syndicated deals and possibly a couple of different groups that are funds that I'm collaborating with in different ways. On the second sort of bucket of our focus is capital. So with capital, capital can be lending capital. So I work exclusively with a group out of South Carolina that's a direct lending company. I've worked with a couple of different private equity and lending institutions over the years and help them lend money, help them raise money. The ones I've worked with in the past, this one in particular doesn't need help with raising funds, so they're just purely just lending. My clients are borrowers that are looking for fix and flip loans and ground up construction loans and also DSCR loans. So that's where I create value as far as helping provide the capital for your projects if you're a borrower potentially. The other part of capital is dealing with accredited investors and passive investors that want to invest into bigger deals with us. That's becoming more of a focus as well. We've got a pretty large database of people that we've worked with in different ways over the years. We're trying to sort through kind of that database and seeing who's interested, who's accredited, who's not accredited, who's interested in passive, and who's looking for more active. So that's happening. My team's prepping some stuff, and then we're going to be hopefully in the next couple of months here picking up our first official deal in the commercial space with a group of investors in a syndicated type of scenario, probably something like that. And then lastly is services. So the three divisions are basically deals, capital, services. So on services, we provide, systems. We build out systems. I have a team that has worked with us for a long time in our internal business to build out tech and marketing systems and acquisition systems, from websites to back end to integrations. My background is technology prior to real estate. So process and tech, like Lean Six Sigma is like a big thing as far as running smoothly and looking at your process and your company and your business. We build out systems for investors all across the country. We've got, right now a handful of newer clients that we're ramping up. And basically the thing there is like, if they're looking to have their own acquisitions process as opposed to having us just bring them transactional scenarios, we can build that for them. And then they go out and they pretty much use that marketing system to generate more deals. And sometimes it's also capital just to get into more conversations. So that's kind of in a nutshell, those three buckets. It's a lot, but that's, I run a couple different teams. We have about 15 to 20 people working full time. I'm a partner in a title insurance agency as well. So that's, I think, so I got a few. Yeah. I looked at this from like initially, and I could talk about this today with you. I'm going to go through like the good, bad, the ugly, like you mentioned. I want to make sure your audience gets value there, but like, I've looked at this from the beginning. Initially, it's just like a way to get out of corporate, which I was able to do that, in the first like year and a half. But then it's like, how do I create an ecosystem? That's what I've really been focusing on for the past like decade, is like an ecosystem from, bringing value to transacting, to building relationships, to building strategic relationships and partnerships. And then ultimately kind of figuring out, how do I make this more of a passive type involvement versus like me doing all the work? So that has to do with like putting teams in place, putting people in place, building out systems, setting up scenarios where I'm not the limiting factor. So that's what I would encourage anybody who's listening that might be like at that point where you're into everything. There's a way to get it to where you're not having to do all of it yourself. And that's where like we work on that. So that's,
Yeah. That's exactly where I focus my time, is for entrepreneurs with 0 to 5 employees to scale so that they are not, they're not the bottleneck in every process.
That's right. Yeah, it's very easy to become that, because then it's like, we have sometimes impose this belief that if we can't do it ourselves, it can't be done or something like that, or it's a solopreneur kind of dilemma, right?
Yes.
So definitely, something that I enjoy helping, and obviously you do as well. Businesses that are trying to grow and they're feeling limited, a lot of times it's because we only have, so many hours in a day. It's like the first thing you probably is get another person to help you do it. Like whether that's, we have had interns, we've had pay for performance, like people that are salespeople, we've had virtual assistants, we've had managers. Like it just depends on where you're at. But yeah, finding the right team to put together, especially in this business, I think you need that. Yeah.
Yeah. And spending money on people and processes can make you more wealthy and give you more of your life back.
I mean, example, I'll give you a quick one. So like I was on the phone with one of my guys up in New Jersey. He's in South Jersey, and he just found out yesterday that there's like this big expo event tomorrow, and we didn't plan for it, but he's going to try to make it work. And he's only going to be able to get there for like half the day because it's like his wife's birthday this weekend. So I feel really bad. I'm like, John, listen, you don't have to go. Like if you can't make it, I know you just found out about it yesterday, but for $150, I paid for a $150 ticket for him to go for 3 or 4 hours. He's going to be able to network with like a couple hundred people. And more than likely, a few of those people will come back with either a deal or a capital need or something else that he can bring value to me, and he gets compensated as a commission sales guy. I help solve the problem. So stuff like that, where you just got to make that decision. And it's like the $150, it's like so little compared to the win that could happen. And so a lot of times we look at spending money. I don't know if your clients ever talk like this, but it's like spending is a word interesting, right? Because we think like spending means like it's an expense. I try to make things investments, right? Like if I
Yes.
put money out, turn it into an investment. So how do I get a return on it? Pretty much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You are speaking my language, my friend. Thank you so much. I want to hear about people's most deals, their wildest deals, their weirdest deals, their stinkiest deals, their worst deals. I once spoke with a lady whose property caught on fire 4 times just in the rehab phase.
I mean, I have a lot of stories. So I'll share just to give a high level overview. So in terms of our experience, we've wholesaled over 200 deals. We've renovated probably about 50 something houses and small buildings. And a lot of that's been northern New Jersey. And this particular gentleman, the house had an issue, said fire. So I thought about that one. And so the second story was pretty much completely, messed up. It was not like something, a small fire. It was a pretty large fire. Had to be, probably a couple $100,000 worth of work at least to get it just up to speed to be able to rent it out. Really great town in northern New Jersey called Montclair. And he had this contract with the guy for a pretty aggressive price. I think it was like 270 maybe, whatever it was. And he was really excited because we knew that there was some investors that I was already in touch with that would likely say that they would want to take on that project because they like the bigger renovations. And some of these guys want to keep the property as a rental. They're not just going to flip it, so they don't have to have as much room in the deal. They can basically renovate it and just refinance out and be totally fine as a rental. So he had the contract. The guy was good. The seller was on board. The seller had some health stuff going on that we weren't fully aware of. Long story short, after we got the contract and he had already signed, and my business partner, basically my client at the time, signed the contract, and then a few days or a few weeks later, I think we can't remember what it was, the guy unfortunately passed away from a heart attack. The seller did, and now the widow, the wife, who was not really involved in the conversation, becomes involved in the conversation. And there was a small sort of misstep as far as on her part, she signed the contract as well. So both parties on the seller side signed the contract, but she did not want to still proceed to close on the sale. She wanted to keep the property at this point. And we had already assigned the contract for like 50 grand, like 55K, I think it was already. And the guy was ready to close and he was like motivated. He's like, this is exactly what I want. Not to mention that there was also an oil tank underground on this particular property that was not contaminating the ground, but had to be removed. And it was actually paid by the seller to remove it so that we can close. And then like a day later, the guy passes away of a heart attack. Like we couldn't reach him and then we find out that he passed away. So the whole thing was the seller, now the widow, doesn't want to sell. We already have the contract assigned. So now I have to go to legal counsel and say, hey, listen, what are our options? Like I'm trying to be a good person here. I'm not trying to hurt the seller, but it's a fire damaged, non-owner occupied investment property. It needs hundreds of thousands of dollars in work. We already have it contracted and we have it sold as a contract to somebody else. He says, well, at this point, you pretty much have the right to sue for specific performance. And that basically means that the seller has to proceed to complete the sale, even though they're saying they don't want to. They legally have a responsibility to sell the property. So we, fortunately, I don't even look at it. We went through that process. It was not, I don't like to have to sue. I'm not litigious, right? I've had to deal with different things. I've gotten sued by owners of property. I've had other scenarios where I have to deal with legal matters. It's just the nature of the business. When you do enough deals, I think you have those things come up. But at the end of the day, with this scenario, like I was the one that was like pushing the seller to close, which was not necessarily what I wanted to do, but it was the right thing, if that makes any sense from a business standpoint. And like my coach, not my attorney, but my coach, I had a mentor at the time saying like, you got to do like, what would the president of JDL do? Not what would Doug Beck do? He's like, what would the president of your company do if it was a decision for the businesses and its shareholders? And I said, well, I'd have to pursue the move down the path of closing this deal because that's the right thing to do for the business. And this is my family's livelihood. So he's like, yeah, you have to have emotions, but you have to also use logic here and say like what your rights are. Because if it was the other way around, she probably would have, done that as well. So, I mean, you want to have a heart, but you got to do the right thing, and the right thing is a difficult thing to do sometimes. So we went down the path. We initiated the process for litigation. Long story short, after like a year and a half, like literally it was a year and a half, and probably about $20,000 in attorney fees that we were paying out of pocket because we knew we had already had like a 50-something thousand wholesale assignment at the end of that. The woman was not willing to cooperate. We went through all the steps. The judge put it on hold or something like that. And then after all that, we come to find out that she fraudulently got a home equity line of credit against the property and that she was basically now facing foreclosure. And that's the crazy part, because now she didn't want to sell the property, but then she borrowed money against the fire damaged house that was never apparently inspected. And now she has foreclosure happening So then she calls us, or my attorney says, hey, are you guys still interested in buying it, even though we're in the middle of litigation? And we ended up closing the deal. So like, it's kind of nuts. Like, yeah, after 2.5 years, I think it was roughly, or something like that. That was probably the craziest deal I've ever dealt with in terms of the scenarios, right? Like you have multiple elements there where you have like husband and wife situation, passes away. Like now you have, no, I don't want to sell anymore. Then you got the whole thing with the fraudulent thing with the HELOC. That was, she didn't say this, she did, but you must, I mean, how you get a HELOC against a house that's that messed up? I don't think that's really legit. And then she's facing foreclosure at the end of all that. So bottom line is, we solved the problem. It took us 3 years, but basically we made like 30 grand at the end of it. But, and then my guy was happy, the property was done, and it's just nuts though. Yeah.
Also, I feel like it's important to point out an oil tank underground at a residential property is pretty weird. Why was that there?
Okay, so New Jersey, believe it or not, I don't know how familiar with New Jersey for some reason.
Not at all.
Yeah.
I waved at it once from New York.
Right? Yeah, you're probably just fine. So for some reason in New Jersey, I don't know what years, but up until probably 1960 or 70, they were putting a lot of oil tanks in the ground and connecting them with plumbing to the basement to then go ahead and actually put the heat for the house. So heating oil.
For the heating for the house.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
The heating oil, like an underground storage tank, basically. They call it a UST, basically. So New Jersey, especially in the cities, like you'll actually find them underneath the sidewalk sometimes. You have to pull the sidewalk out. Like we've had properties also where there has been contamination. So like I said, I have a lot of stories. I mean, that's another story where like we had a property that we did not pull the tank out, but we did a soil bearing test on a property in Newark, New Jersey. And we took the risk and we rolled the dice, and lo and behold, the soil bearing test came back bad, and then we had contamination. But luckily, it was less than the state required amount to have to do a full remediation. It was like right beneath it, and so the guy that was doing the work for us basically took the soil out that was messed up, made sure everything else was good, put everything back together. It was less than $10,000, but it could have been a couple $100,000 if it goes into the water, if it goes under the foundation, all that kind of stuff. So we've had a lot of scenarios like that too, where
that's where my mind went, is as a commercial real estate lender and underwriter in a former life. I think about oil tanks underground and contamination from the point of gas stations and mechanics shops and dry cleaners. Often there's some contamination there.
We got a reputation in New Jersey, and now we're looking at doing this across the country, but where we have the investors and we have a process and a team that runs dispositions, which basically means like flipping the contract to an investor. So the entry point is like a contract with the seller, and then the exit point is, we assign that contract, or we close on the property and then we sell it to somebody else after we close on it. So that's like kind of been our main focus as far as doing those. Some people call it joint venture wholesale, but it's usually with a direct contract holder. It's not to somebody who's just in the middle, because then that creates what you call the daisy chain, right? People will call it daisy chain. So our thing is, if they have a contract directly with the seller, then we have an investor that's directly wanting to buy it. We can put a joint venture together and we can basically do a deal. So in that regard, I was called by a guy who was actually based in Arizona, who had a property that he was able to purchase that was from some type of foreclosure scenario in New Jersey. So he's in Arizona. He calls me about this deal in New Jersey that he knows, like, I'm in New Jersey and I can get these deals done. And he says, here's the thing. It's like a 6-unit building. It's in Union City, New Jersey. So it's like in the, Essex or Union County. I think it's like by the New York City area, sort of. Okay. And, it's not so much just a rehab, though. He said it's a redevelopment opportunity for somebody who wants to turn this into something bigger. They can either add more square footage, or they can, split up the units, whatever it was. It was a little different, but the fact was he gave me the opportunity, and I'm like, all right, so it sounds like, based on what he was presenting, he's like, we need to get like $650 for the property, and we think it's worth potentially over $1 million with like a couple $100,000 put into it. It might be $1.2 million, $1.5 million, in that range when it's all said and done. He's like, there's room on this deal, and that $650 is like a nice margin for us, and we'd be willing to give you a part of that if you guys, bring us an investor. So we went down the process. We analyzed the numbers. We validated everything. We basically took our normal intake process, which is just checking all the numbers, making sure everything adds up. Everything looked good. We sent them a joint venture contract. We said, hey, look, when we close, we want to make this much. At the end of the day, we started off the marketing of that contract for $700,000 before he bought the property, before we bought the property. We had interest at $700 actually, but then we had negotiations with a couple parties. One was willing to do $650. The challenge was they couldn't close in time for us to close with the seller. She had to close faster. So what we did is we used what's called transactional funding, which maybe some of your audience or you may know. And we were able to use a transactional funder to fund 100% of that purchase. The purchase was 510 and the sale was 650. So we had 140K margin less the closing costs. But for us, we participated on that with the guy. We split that 140 with him for bringing the deal. And I never walked in the building. I never saw the buyer. I never met anybody besides the guy I know who's in Arizona. And that's the kind of deal that I look to do, like not necessarily just the size, but that kind of structure where it's pretty passive. And it's just using my connections and my experience to be able to bring deals together. So that's a lot of what we focus on.
If you don't mind, Doug, for folks who don't know, can you give us just a brief description of redevelopment and another of transactional funding? What did you do here?
Yeah, so redevelopment just means that somebody's going to take, a current use and zoning of a building and change that somehow into something else. So it could be like turning it from, let's say, apartments into mixed use, like putting a commercial storefront on the bottom and then doing the apartments above, or it might be turning apartments into condos, or it might be taking land. Development would just be taking empty land basically and making it buildable and stuff like that. That's more true development. But redevelopment, the way I see it is like kind of like renovation, but like kind of on steroids in terms of like doing another level of a renovation, and it's more elaborate. And you have to have typically architects, engineers, people involved to change, attorneys, etc. So to get what they call the highest and best use or the maximum use of the property, sometimes it's worth looking at that when you have like highly densely populated areas, like in New Jersey, a lot of density. So you have like not much land to work with. So you take what land you have. And you want to see, like in New York City, also they have like what's called FAR, which is the air rights, basically. So it means like you can go up a certain number of stories. So if you have a piece of land, a parcel that has, let's say, an 8-unit building, but let's say the FAR allows, another level to be put on top, you might take the roof off, put another level, add another 3 or 4 units, and now you just got, massive boosted value. So things like that would be like redevelopment. With transactional funding, what that basically means is like, I have a property that I can purchase and I don't necessarily want to use, or I can't use any of my own money. So I go to a transactional funder. And by the way, I can help with this. I'm not sure if you have a solution, but we have that in-house where we can transactionally lend on these kind of deals. Basically 100%. The caveat is that you have to have an agreement to buy that property once you close before you actually close. So you have to have a conditioned purchase agreement, basically saying that when you close, this other party is ready to purchase from you at a higher price, kind of like an option. In a way that they're agreeing to pay a higher price than what you've already got it contracted for. And then the transactional funder will basically give you your purchase price. Like in this case, it was 510, and they'll charge a couple of points typically to do that. So it might cost you 10, 15,000 bucks at closing, but now you just heard of a deal that we made over 140 or around 140 gross and like over 100, net on that. So it's worth paying somebody 10, 15 grand to do that basically.
Right. Yeah. So again, for the sake of the audience, if I have to buy a property on Thursday in order to obtain the property, but I can't sell it until Tuesday of next week, I can come to Doug and say, hey, can you help me out with the loan where I own this property for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. I own this property for 5 days.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and a lot of times it could be like even the same day is really actually even more common, believe it or not. But this one, for to be fair, the one in Union City, we had to hold the property for 3 weeks. So because of the timing for the buyer. And then I left this part out, but I probably should add it, that we heard that after the fact, the guy or the group that bought it from us for $650 actually sold it to somebody else for $750.
No kidding.
So we probably left some money on the table, but we had to close and we had like still a nice profit. So it was like those deals don't come every day. We want them to.
No.
So I would say also maybe for your audience as they're looking at stuff, like there is, I think, a PSA type of thing here where like a lot of people get nervous about like properties that are more messed up. Like they're like, oh, fire damaged or it's a big building or whatever. Like actually those are the ones that typically have the bigger margins, not just for like the fix and flip or renovator or the developer, but for the wholesaler too, because if you could find like a messed up building, then the chances are like that's going to have more opportunity for the next person, which means that when I look at like a wholesale fee, I'm saying in a way like, Kris, I'm basically partnering with that investor, but I'm partnering with them for 1 day or 1 week until they actually take over. So like I'm saying, hey, I have this thing under contract. I'm going to be your partner for the next 2 weeks until we close. And then when we close, you're going to buy me out and I'm going to be done with the deal. you're going to take on the project. So it's kind of like the bigger the margin. If you have a deal that has, let's say, $100,000 net profit on it, you know, directionally, I would coach my clients to say you should be making somewhere between 15 to 20 grand, maybe 25 or 30 in some cases of that deal for just bringing that opportunity. So you figure if someone's got $300,000 worth of spread or margin, you could just do the math and it should be relatively to that number. The challenge becomes like when people are trying to just assign, like in this scenario, we could have probably assigned it because the guy was ready to purchase and he had a buyer behind him. But realistically, sometimes double close or transactional funding is also to protect your spread as a wholesale company. If you're trying to flip the property without having to do anything, we sometimes use the double close process and the transactional funding to kind of protect your interest so that you actually take title, you close on it, and then you subsequently sell it so that nobody's upset about how much money you're making for just bringing in the contract, basically. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Thank you. And
Sure.
thank you for educating us on those terms. Who stands out in your mind as helping you along the way? I know you mentioned a mentor. You've mentioned some partners.
Oh, yeah.
Who are the people who you think I really couldn't have done it without this person?
Yeah. So first thing is, you know, I'm a man of faith, so I always put honor to God and glory to God in all things. So number one is God is, you know, the real source of all the things and has given me hope and faith in things that were seemingly sometimes unreal to like have to deal with certain scenarios. So because we didn't even talk about, which I don't know if we'll have time, but COVID was a whole other thing. Like we moved down. Yeah, we moved down to Florida during COVID. And then we had agreements with some parties that were going to renovate property. I'll share that story in a little bit, but I'll come back to your question first. Like,
yeah,
I want to talk about the COVID story too. There's a couple of scenarios there. I think kind of like, my goodness, like, but nonetheless, when it comes to like greater, you know, forces at play here, it's like God first. And then my wife, you know, I want to shout out to my wife, Dima. She's been the biggest, you know, influence as far as keep me on track and my partnership with her in life, not just in, you know, marriage, but everything. And keeping me on track in terms of focusing and kind of kicking me in the butt sometimes when I need to get kicked and get on track with me. But ultimately, you know, inspiring me as well, my kids, and then all that. And then really outside of the God and my family, I would say there's been some, for sure, people in the business and in the industry. There was a guy named John up in New Jersey who helped basically break the ice of our first deal. So just a quick story on that. So I get an email from John, who I'd never met before. I'm on his list, I guess, for like wholesale deals. He was like posting stuff on Craigslist and he was posting properties that he was trying to wholesale flip and stuff like that. So I wanted, at the early days, I'm trying to find ways to get deals like quickly and easily and free, like everyone else. I spent money on direct mail, but I'm like, this isn't really working. So let me go try another way. Let me go online and find people on Craigslist. I took my tech background. I'm like, let me find every single person. I created like a macro to like find every person on Craigslist and, you know, sending an email to every one of them, like systematically, like with a system I had built. It's crazy. I can't even think, like, I don't even know how I did it, honestly. I found some tool that was helping me, but I got in touch with John, and John ended up being a great contact. We probably did 15 or 20 deals in working together. But the first one was the game changer because up until that point, I was trying to get sellers directly under contract using direct mail marketing and doing all these different outbound strategies. And I hadn't really like found somebody who already had the deal. And what I didn't realize, and I called my mentor, his name's Cody. He's another big influence. He's out of Arizona, and some people might know who that Cody is, but he basically has, you know, probably coached and trained tens of thousands at least, if not 100,000 plus. But basically with him, like I called him up because I was ready to quit his program about 6 months in. I'm like, Cody, this isn't working. Like I'm doing the direct mail. I spent like 20 grand on direct mail. He started actually laughing, like not in a disrespectful way, but kind of like surprised at how like convicted and passionate I was about what was going on. He's like, man, let's take a step back. He's like, well, who do you know? Like to your point about like who's made a difference. I'm like, well, there's a couple people I know. There's a guy that's got John that sends me messages. He's like, you got to call John, get in touch with John, find out what deal he has and see. And like, who else do you know? He's like, well, I'm looking at my list, Cody. I said, I've been going to networking events like every week for the past like 6 months, like 2 or 3 a week sometimes. I've got like 500 people in my database. He's like, 500 people? He's like, dude, you just need one of those people to buy the deal that John has and you got a deal. I'm like, why didn't you tell me this before? He's like, well, I didn't know you necessarily didn't realize that. I'm like, well, that's a good point. So then what I do is I go call John. I'm like, John, you got a deal in Hillside, New Jersey. I said, I might have an investor. Would it be okay? My mentor, I told him straight up, my mentor said I could possibly, you know, get into a joint venture with you. It's the first time I ever did it. He's like, yeah, sure. He's like, you bring me an investor, I'll split you 50-50. I didn't even have to ask. He's like, I'll just give you 50% on my spray. Well, how much you making? He's like, well, I'm making 20K on this $100,000 house if we sell it for 120. I'm like, okay, so you're telling me that if I bring, just to be clear, I said, you're telling me you'll pay me 10 grand of the 20K that we're going to sell this for if I just bring you an investor. He's like, yeah, to send me a joint venture contract or an option contract, whatever it was. I go send him a contract. He signs it. I'm at my brother-in-law's house in Central PA. Distinctly remember it because I'm like shaking as I can't even believe this is happening. I'm like typing the message. I send out an email using like MailChimp, and I send out the message to my list after I get the contract. Got this great deal in Hillside. I made it look pretty and stuff like that. And what do you know, Kris? Within like 15, 20 minutes, I got like 10 or 15 responses. Like,
I love it.
I'm interested. I'm like, this can't be real. Like, this isn't really where to work. And I'm like, I guess it might. And then I go and I call this one guy, Rich, who ended up being the buyer. And about 2.5 weeks later, we closed. It was a $10,000, ended up being 10,000, not 20, but we still made like $4,600. But it was the biggest $4,600 in my life at the time because I never had done it before.
Right.
So,
right.
And it was a joint venture with a guy who was super experienced. So that guy, John, then after that deal, we started getting more deals. Then we started closing 1 or 2 deals a month for a period of time. And he became a very strategic acquisitions partner that then we had a jive because he was focusing on getting deals and I was focusing on getting investors. And we're just partnering. And that got duplicated into another guy, this guy, Aaron, another guy, this guy, Darren, this other guy, Irving, multiple people that we've partnered with like that. And guys that were going to sheriff's auction, guys that were getting REOs, like all kinds of stuff. Just I can't emphasize enough, like, and you know this obviously, but like relationships and connections and like, just building those networks is so valuable. So that would be, if somebody listening is stuck, just look at your database, look at who you know, who can you call, who has a deal, who has capital, who has interest in buying, try to connect the dots, put some paperwork together. Obviously, if I can help or Kris can help, reach out. But it's like, that's a very big influence. Another person would be my business partner, Ken. He's on the title side. So he's been a mentor to me because he's got, from the early days, he was helping me understand what you can do, what you can't do from a legal perspective and title perspective. How do you structure stuff? What's feasible? What's not feasible? How do you, he also had a lot of networks of connections, people he's introduced me to. And now like almost 10 years later, we've had a title company for the past almost 10 years in New Jersey. And we're looking at taking that into, commercial real estate deals as well. So we have a couple of deals. One's in Oregon, massive deal. Another couple more that we're working on in different parts of the country. But like, really, just a humble guy, but just super experienced. He's been in the title business for like almost 30 years and just like has so much knowledge and like a mentor, right? Like he just knows it from living it and doing it.
Right.
So, and I could go on. There's many other people. Another Ken, a developer friend of mine, like that just, like I said, I don't want to go too long here. I just want to, there's definitely a long list of people. It's a big.
I get that. And I love that you are not oblivious to that we all have a long list of people that we, when we start thinking about it, we don't have enough fingers and toes to count up all the people who have just impacted us to get us to where we are today. But when you were talking about that deal with your contacts, bringing the investor and he has the property and there was so much there to unpack. I thought I could teach an entire full day class on just that little snippet of what you said. I love it. Awesome. Thank you. You said you wanted to tell us about the Florida COVID story?
Yeah, so Florida COVID story. So let's see. Sometimes I'll say, how do I do a deal without doing all the work? Or how do I do a deal with doing none of the work? Like, this is how I make it fun and exciting. So I think like strategically, who do I need to put in place? How do I run the process? How do I protect and reduce risk and still maximize reward and stuff like that? So in that light, I had connected with somebody. We were still up in New Jersey before COVID. I connected with this guy, Michael. Michael was introduced to me from another guy. If you can't tell, like, obviously, but the people listening, like, it's all about people. And I literally, my board.
I know a guy who knows a guy. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's all people.
And some ladies, too. There are some really amazing ladies in this.
Absolutely. 100%. Yeah. Females, of course. Yeah. This is not just for guys. Exactly. And it's kind of funny because I'm from New Jersey. I know a guy, like, that's like kind of a Jersey thing, but it's really like it's really big on like just connections. But the fact is, like, I met this gentleman, Mike, from a guy named Steven, who's in Florida. They're both out of the Tampa area, right? This going back to 2018, 2019. And at that time, in 2018, we were in the busiest season of our fix and flip business. We had at one point in the summer of 2018, 16 projects going on simultaneously. 14 of them were fix and flips and 2 of them were rentals that we were going to renovate and keep, which we ended up keeping those 2 and then ended up selling them later. But it was madness. I had 3 project managers and basically 6 crews running simultaneously at the same time. And it was just mayhem. Mortgages, you know, lenders, investors, all kinds of stuff. It's pressure testing for sure, but I learned a crap ton and learned what to do, what not to do. But then I, you know, said, okay, we got this figured out in New Jersey. Like, what if we could take it into Florida? That was my next sort of goal, is like, how do I take this into another market? And Florida was one of the markets, because at that time, like I said, I connected with this gentleman, Steve, who's in Florida. His guy, Mike was sourcing deals. Mike was basically an acquisitions guy. Like, he was looking to wholesale, but he was also open to running projects, and he had experience, but he was boots on the ground, as someone would say. And he was also, he had his ear to the market, or whatever, you know, that saying is. He went out and he found like a few properties for us to purchase. And our deal was like, he had asked me, he said, Doug, how many properties can you manage at a time? And I said, well, at the time we're getting like 95% loan to cost. Like, we're getting almost 100% financing because of our experience and my credit and all that. And we have like a lot of investors that are basically wanting to invest on deals with us. So there's not really a limit. I said, it just really is operational limit of like how we run this. I said, if you could help me run the Florida projects, then I could take on as many as you could possibly find, and I'll just fund everything. So I was more or less the financial sponsor. I was taking the loan, getting the investor lined up, managing the project, and that kind of thing. And again, because I don't have to physically be in the same place, I could have a team or a person that's running that. So Mike ended up finding the first couple. We got our contractor lined up. He had a referral for the GC. We priced everything out. We bid it out a couple different people. He found a great contact. We started doing business in Florida, like in this part of Florida, before I actually moved to Florida. And it wasn't like, we didn't know that we were going to move to Florida when we did, because we didn't know COVID was going to happen. But because we got our foot in the door, again, relationship building and going to focus on how to expand and stuff like that, that business experience, that business connection turned into, hey, fast forward a little bit. Mike says, hey, now COVID's happening, and we go, we're buying this property in Newport Richie. It was like a week after COVID had kicked into high gear. We're buying the place, I think. And it's like scary, because I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. He's like, no, this is a great deal. It's in Newport Richie. We're getting it for a slam dunk price. I'm like, all right, but there's only like one lender that I know that's lending, and they're telling me they might not be lending much longer because of COVID and stuff. We ended up going through that project, ended up being like one of our best projects. We sold it in like 4 months. We made like 50-something thousand on that particular flip. But that experience and Mike's relationship, when the time came that COVID was like in full swing, and I'm like, hey, we're considering moving to Florida, not because of the business, but just because we're tired of being stuck in our house. So we love each other, but we want to get like out of the house. He's like, oh, and we're thinking about moving to St. Augustine, because we had been looking at St. Augustine for the kids' schools, St. John counties. We have friends that live out there. And he's like, well, if you're going to move to Florida, it's like over 1,000 miles. He's like, you got to at least look at the West Coast. He's like, ironically, you have these projects that I've been helping you with, but you haven't even been out to them yet. I'm like, yeah, well, I'll come, you know, we'll see what it looks like. So we ended up taking a trip. We came down, I think it was April of 2020. We ended up we were planning on staying for a week in my dad's house in Kissimmee. We ended up staying down for like a month and worked through, you know, picking up a couple properties and then looking at houses for like, you know, investing, but then also relocating. And we ended up falling in love with Sarasota. So we landed down here, and then my wife loved the beaches and stuff like that. I love them too. I mean, it's a beautiful place. But we got through those couple of projects, and then I guess where I was going with the COVID stuff was that was the move. Then what happened is, come towards the end of 2020, I have a business partner in New Jersey who has been construction manager of sorts, or general contractor, but really working for our company predominantly on projects. And so he was in North Jersey, and he's from that area, and he was also bringing us opportunities. So now we're in Florida, right? We moved to Florida in July. We'll say Bob. Bob is the contractor. Bob is in North Jersey, and Bob says, hey, you know what? I can run these projects, and I'm going to be the construction guy, boots on the ground, handle these renovations. We had bought like close to $3 million worth of property probably in the first like 8 to 10 months of COVID, which is kind of nuts to even say.
Wow.
Yeah. Kind of betting on the fact of the market coming back and being one of the few buyers. So really talking about against the grain. And it worked out in many cases. It didn't work out in a few. But the thing that was even crazier was come October, I think it was, of 2020, he was the one, you know, managing the contractor and construction. He calls me up. He's like, hey, I'm actually in California right now. Just wanted to quickly touch base. I'm like, oh, cool. How's the weather out there? Like, he's like, oh, it's great. He's like, yeah. I'm like, oh, when are you coming back? And he's like, oh, actually, we're moving to California. I said, you're moving to California? I said, we just bought like $2 million worth of property, and we have like almost $500,000 of construction to do here. And you're my guy, boots on the ground in New Jersey. How's that going to work? And he goes, well, you know, I'll figure it out. I'm like, dude, I'm on the hook for the loan. I've got investors' money. I got my own money. Like, this is not going to this is not going to pan out very good if we don't solve this like right now. Like, you can't just call me and just be like nonchalant and tell me you're in another state that we just both moved literally thousands of miles away from the properties. So
And a little notice would be nice.
A little bit of a notice would have been cool. You know what I mean? So I just thought that was like kind of surprising, to say the least, to give them the benefit of the doubt. But I'm like, all right. So we ended up, luckily we found a general contractor that worked for our company on probably 6 or 7 projects across about a 2 to 3 year period of time. The back end of that story, and I'm still dealing with it. And actually just this week, we went under contract on our last project in New Jersey to sell it, which it's not even finished.
5 years?
Yeah, exactly. 5-year deal. So like literally a couple of days ago, I got a signed contract and we're attorney reviewing now. But that particular property, to give you perspective, it's in Bergen County. The original bid for that construction, talk about COVID, another problem happening in COVID is cost of construction,
right,
and availability of contractors. The initial bid was $320,000, I believe, or 310, 320, something like that for this particular project. It was what they call an add a level, which basically means like taking the roof off, putting a second story, and making it look like a new construction home. But even though it's not really new, it's just updated, but it's a lot of renovation. So that was our original plan. And the contractor bid like 310, 320. By the time we actually had the approval to go start the work or to get that project started and going with the town and look at the plans, the architect, the engineer, all that stuff, going back, a year later, basically, it took us to get to that point because of all the different elements. At that point, the contractor rebid the project. He basically renegotiated, retraded it at 600 and change, 600,000. They're going to almost double. And like the market wasn't that great. I mean, it was okay, but it wasn't like it went up like enough to where it makes sense to get that $300,000 difference. So now we have a different problem. Now we're saying, well, are we going to just do an add a level, or do we need to just knock this thing down and go new construction? So we ended up making the decision to go new construction. Long story short, very long story, few years, is that going through the process with the approval, getting the township to understand stuff, small town in northern New Jersey, difficult town to deal with, difficult people, contractor issues, all this stuff. Like finally, it was the end of last year, we got the approval to do the new construction and we went to go to market. We had it sold in the holidays. We had it sold for the right price during the holidays, fell out of contract and attorney review, went back to market. This is like recent, right? This is like stuff like now. And then just this week, we finally got another contract that's looking favorable. So praying to God that it closes. It's been the thorn in my side. It's been the most challenging project as a isolated project in my career as an investor. So it'll be a relief once we get through that, for sure. Yeah,
as soon as you said construction prices during COVID, I thought, they at least doubled for the most part.
I think that's part of the challenge too when you deal with certain people. Like you don't know, this concept of partnership, it comes up sometimes where it's like, if you're looking to partner with people, like it's like getting married, you're gonna have to deal with that person. So I guess the caveat of like partnership is there's so many good things, but it's like do it deal by deal, because if it doesn't work on the one deal, you can always get a different one. If it's somebody that, you vetted extensively to be in a partnership for long term, that's a different story, but it's like getting married, So I kind of, initially it was kind of like that with that guy, Bob. And it worked out for a little while. We did a lot of projects successfully. And then that whole thing with moving came up and it's like, this isn't going to help us, accomplish what we set out to do here at all. It's like a major setback. So I'm excited that we got through it. Like it's definitely fulfilling. It's been grueling. We had probably 10 to 12 projects that were sizable. Like the average renovation was 200 to 300,000 on most of those projects each. So significant construction. And I've gotten better because of it, I guess you could say. It's just been a really long and drawn out process. It's shaped me up to give me some callous, I guess you could say, with challenges and risk. Yeah.
I have learned some similar lessons as well. There was one year, I'd have to think back to which year it was. I know it's been in the last 5 years. I filed income tax returns on 17 different entities because of all of the partnerships I was in.
Oh, yeah.
And in the last 18 to 24 months, I've shifted my strategy to I'm no longer a formal partner. I am a fractional business partner, which essentially means for a particular term, for a particular deal. And we're not business married. We're business closely associated.
There you go.
Yeah, we're in a serious committed relationship. Not married.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I know we're running short on time, But I would love for people to know how they can reach you.
Appreciate
And
that. I mean, we do a lot of stuff for free online. If you go to douglasjbeck.com, that's my personal site. So you can check out that site and kind of poke around. It kind of has a layout of some of the different things we talked about today, from the lending side, the investment side, we have a mastermind group and stuff as well. We have the system side. So, and I've got a free white paper on there about how to add an extra 10 grand a month. You know, just a kind of arbitrary number, but I kind of show 3 different ways that are not the most common ways. Like, you don't have to have $1 million to get 10K of passive income. You've got to think about, how do I connect with the right people? How do I put deals together and structure things in a way where I'm not actively involved every single moment? And we've done that in multiple ways in our businesses. So I'm excited to share that with folks. There's also a video supplement that's about an hour and change if they want to watch that. That's free. If you go to that site, you download the white paper that I wrote and also the video that I did for my actual group. And then we've got other stuff, like we do a training event as well, the Dealmaker Live. So if they go to the dealmakerlive.com, it's a free 3-hour training workshop style type, where I do 15, 20 minutes of training, and then I do 15 to 20 minutes of actual getting it done. So you actually work at your own pace, but for that 15-minute block to do the stuff, a lot of social media, a lot of connection making, a lot of relationship building, a lot of deal analysis, structuring, that kind of stuff in the training part of it. So if you're struggling as far as how to use social media, how to connect with people, how to analyze deals, how to negotiate, might be a good resource as well. And yeah, I mean, on Facebook and stuff like that is probably the best way to connect. Just my name, Douglas J. Beck. You know, happy to connect with you guys on a call. Feel free to get in touch and we can set up a time to talk more about where I can add some value to what you're working on. And I do appreciate the opportunity, Kris.
Doug, thank you so much. And I will be sure to link your website to everywhere that we put this out. It has been a delight to get to know you better.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to chatting some more real soon, and let me know what I can do to help you out as well.
For sure, I will. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Talk soon.
Bye-bye.